Mega Man Issue 23. For no reason, Otto thinks that shining Mega Man's helmet to make it too bright will have him look perfect for his big day, and Roll says she'll fix Dr. Light's tie. I can't help but not like that, because that's something a wife is expected to do instead of a daughter. Mega Man feels bad for Roll because the city is throwing a birthday party for him and not her. Conveniently, she doesn't mind like most people would, and the fact that it reminds her of when she saved people on a cruise only makes it obvious how forced it is that nobody seems to remember her. Especially since it wouldn't be hard for Dr. Light to inform people that he created Roll on the same day as Mega Man, which you'd think he would have already done. If only this issue could have taken place before that one. They prepare to walk outside and are instantly bombarded with questions by reporters. And one of them is a conspiracy theorist somehow, who asks if they're hiding Wily in their basement. And I don't like that Wily's bathrobe is the exact same one that Starlight ends up wearing later on. Apparently, the artist for IDW got lazy with that. It doesn't suit Wily at all. Mainly the color. Why is he wasting time watching the news report on Mega Man getting thrown a birthday party when he'd know he'd hate it? The reporter's dialogue is so boring because it just states what we already know. Mega Man thanks the crowd, and Wily manipulates Proto Man by making sure he sees him get praised to try to get him jealous, explaining why he's watching this. Out of nowhere, even the person interviewing Dr. Light is an advanced robot. The robot reporter from earlier talks like a person too, but didn't look like one. He says he loves all of his creations, but Mega Man's the best son ever, which gets Proto Man mad. Did he really expect him to compliment the one who ran away? Wily tells him he'd understand if he used the power he gave him to get revenge, and when he warps away, he's thankful for getting no more moralistic questions, which just makes me wish we saw one of them, because him standing near him silently only made it look like he thought of him as the good guy. Meanwhile, there's blatant padding where the Robot Masters want to get something for Mega Man's birthday. There's just no way Cutman would bother wearing a hat. I get why Iceman isn't answering Gutsman's calls. Why did one of them even consider getting him a food processor when none of them eat food? I guess they run off electricity because running up electric bills is better than them running on food, even though biomass-eating robots were invented in real life. Because the Robot Masters are only meant to be owned by people rich enough to afford the extra electric bills. But still, this is the future. There's no way Dr. Light wouldn't be able to make them able to eat. Why would he make them capable of feeling nauseous and capable of being cold, but not make them able to eat? It's also forced that Cutman considers getting him a pet. Eventually, they wisen up and try to get a gift card. The next page has extremely boring dialogue by the mayor, who's drawn to look untrustworthy and acts annoyingly enthusiastic. It just seems to me that no actual mayor would act like this. It'll be creative if the mayor isn't portrayed as an antagonist at any point. He literally names the city after Mega Man in his honor, even though it's a name that sounds bad. What was the original name for the city? It must have been very forgettable. Then Proto Man tries to shoot Mega Man and whistles his distinct melody, and Mega Man redundantly tells the mayor to get to safety and gets thanked. He tries to reason with him that he could easily do the fight somewhere else, and something gets shot, which provokes Mega Man into flying over to him with the rush jet. And Proto Man jumps off the tower and grabs the banner and reveals that he can wall jump out of nowhere. Eventually he shoots Rush and then Mega Man, and when he tells Proto Man to let him take care of Rush first, he hesitates and the original Robot Masters show up, offering to distract Proto Man for him. Which doesn't get interesting until Proto Man throws a sharp boomerang to damage one of them. Rush gets warped away. Mega Man tells Proto Man that he clearly doesn't care about anyone. There's no indication that he's wrong, and their fight is exactly like you'd expect, so whatever. Like it's interesting to see nothing but one attack type. Proto Man gets told he wins, which is weird since he's the prototype, and Wily wasn't the one who made his weapons. And Mega Man tells him not to aim for his IC chip because it'd break Dr. Light's heart. Conveniently, this caused them to remember Dr. Light hugging him and saying he never should have put him in harm's way. So he decides to run away, And then Megman acts out of character by grabbing his scarf and trying to take off his helmet to see who he is, because Flynn likes to make him a hothead out of nowhere. Yeah, we totally got that impression of him in Mega Man 8. Not to mention all the times in this very comic where he's saying, like, violence is wrong, I wish I didn't have to do it. He could have easily known who he was if Dr. Light told him he bought Proto Man a yellow scarf. You'd think he would have told him about it, because we saw that in the montage. And the story ends with things fading to a flash of white light for Worlds Collide, which I already reviewed all of. It's weird to think Worlds Collide was the first time Proto Man and Mega Man were on the same side, and it was treated like it was nothing. It gave you the impression that the comic was further along than it was. You'd think Wily would have the Genesis Wave reprogram Proto Man to be completely on his side. Also, the part where Dr. Light said Raw Moon in Worlds Collide and makes Wily look scared visually makes no sense, because in the Mega Man comic he didn't know about Raw Moon yet, and Wily would have had no reason to mention him the entire length of the crossover, and it definitely wouldn't make sense that it would make him look scared, because he said the name is something he trusted at that point in the comic. Mega Man issue 28. With the crossover over, Mega Man notices that he's fixed, but doesn't remember what happened in the last few hours. Because for some reason, when he did the Super Genesis Wave, he wanted to forget the crossover, when Sonic didn't. And the other robots around him are fixed too, because he rewrote reality with the Super Genesis Wave so that they'd all be fixed by the time he got home apparently. How convenient that that's all he did with that power, when the comic constantly has this theme about him going mad with power. Apparently that's only with offensive power, so fine. And it's only if he uses that power too often in a row. Still, the reason that Mega Man X was put to sleep for such a long time was because his mind had to go through a bunch of simulation algorithms for morality testing to make absolutely sure he'd become a good person in Dr. Light's absence instead of a Knight Templar. Copy X didn't go through all of that morality testing, and that's why he became a Knight Templar who treated Reploids like second-class citizens, because all he cares about is protecting humans. Apparently, Dr. Light raising Mega Man was single-handedly enough to convince him to not use the Super Genesis Wave for anything else but returning things to normal. You'd think being raised by Dr. Light would make him even more willing to use the Super Genesis Wave to end all wars and violence and get rid of every disease. I guess he didn't have the time to think of all that. The point is, he didn't go through all of the testing that X did. So you'd think with the power of the Super Genesis Wave, he would be a little bit like Copy X, but apparently having a father is good enough. He expects Proto Man to explain himself, and he arms his cannon again instead. Which I assume makes sense because explaining his issues with his father and him would be too upsetting, and because he doesn't want to look like a coward by running away. Wily feels like he's forgotten last month, which is weird since Mega Man said he only forgot a few hours. So Wily tends to exaggerate even to himself apparently. So he turns on his computer to replay the video diary he made that he could have easily not made because he'd have nothing to gain and everything to lose from anybody else watching it. It's not like he's very forgetful, and so he made it to remind himself. He's reminded that he planned on applying the wave generator to Raw Moon to control every electronic device on the planet. And Raw Moon tells him the test was a success and his plan starts now. Raw Moon shocks him, and I have to remind myself that he might be awake 24/7, and while he would have known, he'd figure out if he was trying to use a virus to reprogram him to be loyal and attack him right away. I guess he thinks he wouldn't be able to run out of the room in time to avoid getting hurt if he did unleash a virus on him. But if he could, then yeah, that's no excuse. Ramen wastes a whole page saying he arrived on the planet 20,000 years ago and was worshipped so much that a city was built for him that he buried. Ramen plans to shut down technology to cause humanity to destroy itself, which he wants for absolutely no reason. Because the writing is too lazy to give villains motives, which is something that the Adam West Batman show was mocked for. You'd think machines would be made by people, and no person would make it like this against a planet that's not even his own planet. Wily says Raw Moon made the robot masters immune to his own power. Why? But Wily can't use any of its programs and has to run out of the building. I find this interesting, but it's mainly because I never experienced the plot this is inspired by. As apparently this is inspired by a non-canon Mega Man game that Capcom doesn't want to acknowledge anymore. I understand him wanting to adapt it because it is a lot more interesting than Mega Man 3 is. I'm just saying it hurts some of my respect for this arc now that I know it's just another game adaptation. At least in the game, it wasn't as emphasized how bad the MP field was to the world, so the comic is being creative with this. Mega Man continues with its completely uncreative fight, and when Dr. Light tells Roll that Proto Man's up there, it causes her to climb to the top of the tower even though it's dangerous. Why didn't she do this after Dr. Light said the name Blues when he first saw him? She would have done this earlier. She puts herself in danger for the sake of being self-sacrificial when it should be obvious that he would rather have her be safe, and she tells Mega Man who Proto Man is, and puts herself in front of him, causing herself to get shot by Proto Man, which he thankfully regrets. Logically, does it really make sense that we're able to see his eyes? Then there's pages showing people unhappy about technology not working in a variety of ways, which reveals that there's robot waiters for no reason. The fact that we see an airplane falling really goes to show you that this concept was way too dark to be in the classic series. Plenty of pages show the robot masters that aren't Wily's getting knocked out, as well as Mega Man, and eventually only Proto Man's left awake. Mega Man Issue 29. It starts with Mega Man waking up in a tube of green liquid for some reason in front of Dr. Light as a robot's walking behind him perfectly fine. Dr. Light tells him that all technology on Earth was offline for 2 weeks, and it took that long for humanity to develop the coding that's protecting their systems now. Meanwhile, Roll hasn't been fixed in all of this time and is in a coma even though she's a robot. The thing on her head just reminds me of some obscure Mega Man computer game where Roll dies. And that's because that's what this is apparently based on. He says he'd need his best tools to do the repairs and preserve her IC chip, but they're all offline. The fluid solution that's protecting Mega Man from the EMP wave with magic would only complicate the damaged pieces of her IC chip. And the wave is intensifying every day, which could make her condition keep getting worse. Why didn't he have a way to transfer the data in an IC chip to an intact one? I guess even if he did have it, he couldn't use it because of the EMP. I'm just saying he could basically make a Project Phoenix for both Mega Man and Roll, have a way to transfer their minds with the press of a button. Also, why didn't Raw Moon make the EMP wave as intense as possible right away if all he wants is humanity's destruction and he's fine with intensifying it in the first place, and he can do that? It doesn't seem necessary to explain that he can intensify it. There's too much boring dialogue from an old friend of Dr. Light's who built Plant Man, who was able to endure the blackout because he's like that. Now it's still confusing because he's running on electricity. I would assume that he would be affected by the EMP. It turns out Plant Man has their only lead. I wish the art didn't get like this just because it's a flashback, because it makes me less invested in the story. It's explained that 4 years ago, the landfront ruins rose out of the Amazon jungle by an earthquake. Because that makes sense, right? And when people tried to investigate, the EM field around the ruins was a problem for them, and he led the remains of the research party. So why did the ruins rise out of the jungle in the first place? What took so long? Despite what happened to him and the others because of the EM field, he somehow wasted 3 years begging to go back there. But why wouldn't he have searched through the entirety of the ruins successfully? Wily was able to get to Raw Moon, and the only trap, if anything, they had to deal with was a slide that made him fall down a cliff. So logically, they should get to him just as easily. If Pedro had gotten to Raw Moon, first off, he probably wouldn't have survived up to this point. He apologizes for rambling when Mega Man somehow asks what this has to do with the blackout. Why else would he have told the story? Somehow he needs to be told it's from the ruins. And Dr. Light reveals that the other robot masters that got damaged haven't been brought back online yet, and fortunately justifies why. At best, that protective coating that somehow exists will only last another week, and it can't produce enough for multiple coatings. And at the rate the EM wave is getting worse, organic people will start suffering too. That makes sense, right? So a page is spent establishing that various robot masters in Rush were made immune to it. Eventually, Proto Man gets mentioned again, and hopefully Dr. Light heard Proto Man apologizing to Roll because he's not deaf. Then in the flashback, Proto Man says this isn't how it was supposed to be, and gave Dr. Light something that would protect his new kids if he used it on a computer, and he warped away. The data he gave him allowed Dr. Light to develop the protective coating so fast. All because Wily didn't make him have no free will. It's like the writer wrote himself into a corner and he had to have this be the case for the heroes to win. And somehow, Mega Man's asking why Proto Man tried to shoot him. They wonder how they could all get to the ruins, and out of nowhere, Dr. Light's reminded of his old hobby project plane that was in storage, and it's fortunately explained that it's gonna have the protective coating put on it. Since when is Dr. Light able to pilot a plane? That'd take years for him to learn, and he already had his hands full trying to become an engineer. At least I can say I guess it's not a Deus Ex Machina, because he is old, so he'd have plenty of time to learn how to become a pilot. Gutsman shakes him too much, shaking his hand, and Plantman says he's gonna stay here and help the doctors try to find a way to expand the reach of the protective coating and get more robot masters working. Proto Man warps to Raw Moon hours later, wondering what Wily did, and has to defend himself from Raw Moon. Wily calls him his boy to manipulate him and tells him to follow him. I have to wonder why the teleport ray can work at all if it's technology too. Wily hand waves it away as satellites, making me wonder why the EMP field doesn't reach as far as satellites, and says he's tired of sneaking food past Raw Moon. Why is he still in the building? Apparently he came back in because he wanted shelter and couldn't make it out of the jungle because it was too thick. Proto Man gets mad at Wily, who says that it's Raw Moon's plan, and as I wonder why the artist is drawing such dark shadows around his eyes, he's asked why Raw Moon didn't kill him. He wonders if Raw Moon can't reach him down here, or he's too lazy or toying with him. At least the writer tried to explain it. Wily says Raw Moon's too powerful for Proto Man to take on alone, and naturally assumes that Raw Moon altered the coding of Wily's robot masters to turn them against him. So we only trust Proto Man because he fixed him by himself. So why did he fix him by himself, if he didn't know Raw Moon was going to betray him? Wouldn't that have been more effort? How convenient! He plans to finish his new robot, which he's making by using what he learned about Raw Moon. So Mega Man pilots the plane because I guess he got piloting information put into his brain, and it crashes, causing one of the robot masters to think that was awesome, as all of them are conveniently unharmed. Mega Man reveals that the plane was shot down, and then he gets threatened by Wily's robots, who give Mega Man and his team a lot of trouble. I have to assume Flashman's only able to stop time against a being and not stop time in general, because if that was possible, he would have won right away. But I don't see why Time Man is able to slow down time in general, but he can't stop time in general. I guess it's just too much power. Mega Man plans to tell his friends what to target as the story ends, and I'm wondering why he's not being attacked as he's busy talking while standing still. Even if he had told all of them what the weaknesses of each Mega Man 2 Robot Master were before this, they would have forgotten it by now because they wouldn't have needed that information. Or maybe not, because they don't have the same types of brains as we do. This issue is about the city celebrating Mega Man's birthday in a totally uninteresting way, where he just stands there with the mayor, until eventually Proto Man tries to fight him. The only interesting part of the fight was when he threw Cutman's weapon, and then eventually he decided to spare Mega Man, which wouldn't have logically happened because Again, Wily had no reason to not reprogram him, for this very reason. And him deciding to do this really calls into question why he'd even bother trying to fight him again. It makes sense that when I saw him with his helmets in a flashback in Worlds Collide, I naturally assumed Wily had reprogrammed him, because that's the easiest explanation for why it would work for him. And sometimes the simplest explanation is the best one. There's nothing to say, it's just another issue that's good by Flynn standards, but boring by normal standards. This issue is about Ramu deactivating humanity's technology and betraying Wily because he wants the end of humanity, but surprisingly, the story is too lazy to explain why properly. Like you might have been looking forward to. Sure, humanity's had a lot of wars and stuff, but that doesn't explain it because most people don't want its destruction because humans fight with each other. So I'm still wondering why someone would program Ramu to be like this. Why would he care that humans war with each other if he doesn't care about the humans who get inconvenienced by it? So if he's sadistic like this, you'd think he'd be happy that they're warring with each other, not want to punish them. Eventually, because Dr. Light doesn't want his sons to keep fighting, Rose stupidly puts herself in harm's way and gets shot by Proto-Man. And I wonder why Ramu made Wily's personal robots immune to his power without taking that immunity away if it was also planning to lock Wily out of his own database. And of course, it's good that it does something the game doesn't, because this issue and the next one are going to have a lot more emphasis on how the EMP wave affects the entire world. But it really could have done without seeing airplanes fall out of the sky. This issue is about Mega Man getting told long-windedly to go to the ruins in a plane that it turns out Dr. Light had despite being an engineer and not a pilot, which can be used because of a protective coating against the EMP fields that got developed that was used on Mega Man. Because Proto-Man gave Dr. Light a flash drive with the data. All because Wily didn't brainwash him like the other Robot Masters for no reason. The rest of the story is filler. It's not interesting when they have to deal with Wily's Robot Masters because they're doing nothing creative. It's definitely an interesting premise, but I can't help but notice it's full of holes. Why would you establish that Ramu can intensify the EMP waves with no explanation for why he doesn't intensify them as much as possible instantly? How do they even know how to go to Ramu when logically Pedro would have just kept going through the ruins and met Ramu and gotten killed and never would have been able to tell them about the ruins in the first place? Although, if they had common sense, they would have known to go to the ruins without being told to, because where else could the EMP field come from? I really wish the protective coating idea was gotten from someone other than someone who should really be fully under Wily's control. Either have him be told by Wily to do this for Dr. Light, because Wily would want Ramu stopped too at this point, or just have Dr. Light develop it on his own because he's supposed to be a genius. So I guess it could have still worked out.